So, so before we kind of touched on what CPUs were, how they do processing and how they're made, etc. Now I was hoping to go into more of a what do they look like and what are they, which types I can get and how much they cost and just the general sort of side of things. So to start off with, I think a good place is usually, well, what kind of CPUs am I able to get? You may hear there's Intel CPUs. You might hear that there's ARM CPUs. Sorry, I should really do that in capitals. ARM CPUs. You've probably heard of this M1 recently, and you've also maybe heard of AMD. Now, of course, there's more CPUs than this, but I'll quickly go through these ones at the moment. So at the moment, I'm on a MacBook. So this MacBook is an i9 processor. It's not an M1 processor, and I'll go into why the difference between these why it makes a difference basically. So my i9 is meant to be the top range processor in the Intel range, right? So these guys here are Intel, there, and let's change the colors. So I could buy this is a MacBook Pro, by the way, and I could buy a brand new MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro 13-inch, for example, with an M1 processor. Well, that's Apple's, right? That's made by Apple. That's an Apple processor that they've recently come out with, and they're very fast. They're extremely good. They're incredibly streamlined. So are i9. So are Intel. They're brilliant. There's no for all intensive purposes. There's not much difference between them all. Okay, some of them are more powerful, some of them are less powerful. But if we carry on looking down the aisle of i9s, or sorry, Intels, well, actually, I've got i7s. So with Intel, you have i7, you also have i5, you have i3, you also have older ones. Now, Pentium, I think that's how you spell it. And I don't think we should talk about these. They're a bit old. We don't tend to use these anywhere anymore. It's usually one of these or the i9. So Intel processors, they have i9, i7, i5, i3s. And effectively, the best way to think of these is just that these ones are the least powerful. So number 3 is the least powerful, and an i9 up here is basically the most powerful. As a whole, of course, there could be some i7s that are more powerful than i9s, but probably not, very rarely. And we also have generations, right? So this is why I wanted to speak about how efficiency works in CPUs before. So I hope you appreciate how this clumps together, how this meshes together now. So I might have an i7 that is let me do this in a different color. So I might have an i7 down here that is an 8th sorry, excuse me, it might be an 8th generation Intel CPU. Now, what does 8th generation mean? Well, it just means the 8th version that came out. It's like 5G, right? 5G. The G just stands for generation. It just means the next best thing. 4G was the 4th generation. 3G was the 3rd generation, etc. So we have an i7 8th gen. It could possibly be faster than an i9 6th gen. I to be honest, don't think they do these. So this is not exact. Don't take these generations or the i7s. I'm just doing this out of demonstrative purposes. So what the difference here is that the 8th generation ones are newly engineered, which means their input, remember, our 10 goes in, and this could be an input here, and that's relatively efficient. That's a relatively efficient input. Whereas our 6th gen, even though this might have, and I haven't spoken about cores or threads yet, but I'm just this might have more processing power, as it were, the i9, but it might have, perhaps the engineers weren't as efficient in this. So this is multiplied by 10, right? This is the same circuit we're talking about. Maybe they weren't as efficient, and they had to go like this for a multiplied by 10. So it's a little bit longer. It physically takes longer to do it. The generations of things, they rely on different instructions. They have different sort of things going on, but they're very, very negligible to most people. When we get into the hardware hacking section, and some of the things like maybe buffer overflows and how memory's working, don't worry about these terms too much. But when we get into more of the hacking side of things, we may need to know about this. But for now, don't take this as gospel, because these are analogies. But this is the kind of thing that's happening effectively when we're talking about the difference between an i9 and an i7. So you can get i7s that might be faster or more efficient, should I say. So based on what we were saying before with the efficiency of a circuit, well, I thought that my i9 was very efficient until 2 years later we came out with something and we realized actually there's a more efficient way of calculating times 10, multiply by 10. So we'll put that on our new chips. Then it gets more efficient, it gets faster. So even though the i9 might be able to do, say, 3 billion, remember giga is billion, so 3 billion hertz, so calculations per second, and this one might only be able to do 2.4 giga, meaning billion hertz calculations per second. Only few, well, I mean, I'm going to say only 0.6 billion difference, so that's quite a lot. But this i7 could be faster simply because it's got more efficient circuits inside. So this is the kind of thing that we need to appreciate when we're talking about differences in the i9s. This is not just for Intel. This is for all of them. When Apple comes out with their second one, the I don't know, 2 or whatever, or the M2 version 2 or generation 2, whatever they want to call it, then perhaps they've figured out new things, how to make things more efficient, and the same sort of principle applies and it'll be faster. Who knows? But that tends to be what happens anyway. So the next step, let's do a green, let's get on a bit monotonous here. We've spoken here about the Intels, this is where we were. We've spoken about the Intels quite a bit, and M1 is very new, so we'll skip that for a second. Let's get into the AMDs. Now, AMD is exactly the same. They are now using Ryzen 3, 5, and 7, and I like to think of these as sort of an equivalent of i3s, i5s, i7s. There's a speed difference. You also have thread rippers, which are fast. And in the next video, actually, what we'll discuss is not just desktop CPUs, but server CPUs. We'll get into this more power thing later on. But for now, I think the AMD section is good enough. You know, these are just the types of CPUs you can get, and one's faster than the other effectively. So in the next video we'll go through what ARM processors are and then we'll go through the server processors. Thank you very much for watching.